Oh, today I just want to get something out of my head, really. It's a bit of a crazy one, but let's just do it whilst I've got the idea fresh in my brain. So I'm thinking that in probably 20 to 30 years, we're going to have flights to Mars. Maybe before then. Maybe with how quickly AI is progressing and how enthusiastic Elon Musk and others are, Jeff Bezos now, to explore space. We could be there in 10 years, but I think the first few flights for colonists, flights that attempt to colonize Mars rather than just arrive at Mars or send a passenger to Mars to confirm it can be done safely or relatively safely, I think that's going to be in 20 to 30 years from now. And I was thinking about this. I feel like a lot of people in their minds would like to be colonists on Mars or love the idea of being a colonist on Mars. And I think, when that job becomes a reality, when it becomes a possibility in the future, because I think it will. I know it sounds crazy, but I think it will be a possibility in 20 to 30 years that becomes a job. I think initially a lot of people are going to apply because they want to be the first or they like the idea of it. And I think 99% or more of those applicants are going to be, given details about the job, they're going to think about it, and they're just going to say no. I actually think most of the people who apply aren't going to be willing to be a Mars colonist. And the reason why, and this is why I'd like to do it actually, I would love to be a Mars colonist, but I'll get into why it's not going to be a very glamorous job and why most people, after initially being interviewed and going through the applications, aren't going to be interested in it. A lot of them won't be fit enough to do it. They'll probably have to be biologically 34 like me or younger, maybe. It's simply because it's going to be very difficult. I think a lot of people have this idea of I'll be one of the first and it's going to be so amazing and it's a new frontier. And after about 2 days, 3 days, maybe a couple of weeks actually, that idea is going to just drop out of the minds of these people, because the reality is it's a very harsh place to live. It's totally different gravity. There's no atmosphere. There's no stunning views. There's no wildlife whatsoever. There's no water. Well, there's no moisture in the air, and there's no water on the surface. I think there's frozen water beneath the ground, so it'd be really difficult to get water. But that's a whole other thing. But the job itself is going to be quite taxing. I think physically somewhat, and mentally very, very taxing. Very, very taxing. Yeah, because your priority is not that most of what you're doing is going to be survival. You're going to be in some weird spacesuit. There's no oxygen there for you to breathe, so you're going to have an oxygen recycling system or something like that, some kind of closed oxygen system. So you're always going to be worried about dying and not having enough oxygen. And your mission really is going to be seeding plants, making artificial indoor environments. You aren't going to see a lot of Mars, really, except from within a building, looking outside of a window because of the atmosphere. Right? There's not going to be much point in walking along the surface of Mars, scouting one area to another, because we've got drones and other tech that are going to do the mapping and that kind of stuff probably. The job as a human is just to make sure it's running well. AI will be smarter than us and hypothetically would be better at colonizing, but I think it's going to have to be a human role. And so you're just going to be working to survive. You're going to be planting plants in artificial environments and very strict laboratory conditions. So I don't know if any of you have ever tried to grow mushrooms before. I have. I've succeeded and failed several times growing mushrooms. And it's going to be like that. It's not going to be like growing a houseplant at all. It's going to be very clinical and very difficult. Every single meal, every bit of water that you have, you're going to have to account for it. Initially, anyway, because there's not going to be an abundance of food. You're probably going to be shipped off with a bunch of supplies that are going to be rationed out, calorie per calorie, nutrient density, and everything like that. And you're going to have to account for the calories you're taking, the water you're having. Every part of your life is going to be measured by yourself and by others, more or less. And like I say, physically, it's going to be weird. It's not necessarily that it would be hard work, moving equipment and planting things and looking at things and making sure the AIs and technology are running things properly, reporting discoveries and trying to establish centralized databases and stuff. Because half your job's going to be analysis. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be physically taxing in the sense that because gravity is different, and there's not really sunlight in the same way, it's just gonna be a real shock and stress for your body. It's not necessarily gonna make you physically that fatigued, but mentally it will be very hard to adapt to. And it's like I say, it's just a harsh environment. It's like being in the middle of a desert, like a sandy desert. I'm not talking a desert by the actual classification, because a tundra's desert. A lot of tundra is desert, or a lot of desert is tundra, rather. I mean, it's just going to be sand and rocks and nothing. There's no trees, there's no animals, right? And so it's going to be very difficult to stay there long term for most people. For probably, I'd say 99.5% of the population will struggle with this. So most people who apply won't go through with it. You'll be completely isolated from any communication with people back home, people back on Earth. Completely, I would imagine. I could be wrong, but I mean, maybe you'll get a message every month or every 3 months. But it's gonna be like being in jail, except you've got no prison. You've got no prison guards. There's no rules, yeah? That's another thing. But yeah, it's just a very difficult environment. There's nothing to look forward to in that kind of environment. Initially, like I said, a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, and maybe every now and then you're going to look outside and think, wow, this is Mars. And, the philosophical depth of that is going to hit you, yeah? But your day-to-day reality is looking at a barren wasteland that you can't step out into, that you can't take a mask off your face to observe, right? So it's going to be psychologically really difficult just being there in general. You'll have to be there for probably at least a year, but realistically, probably 3 to 5 years, because there's not going to be many flights back, is there? There's not going to be 50 flights a day. It's not Heathrow Airport. You have more chance of being contacted in Antarctica or the Arctic Circle or Alaska, for example. Yeah, it's more remote than anything that exists on it. It's the most remote place you'll ever be able to be, which for some is appealing when they think of, I love a little break from people. But 3 to 5 years, very isolated away from everybody and everything you've ever known, is not going to be easy for most people. The next thing is, you might think, well, that's okay, because the people who are going to come and do this, they're going to be really nice. They're going to be, they're going to be ready for this mission. No, I don't think they are, actually. I think a few of the people are going to be narcissists who insist on being the first. And they're going to be unbearable to deal with day to day. A lot of these people are going to be unbearable to deal with. And the thing is, you will be forced to live with them for 3 to 5 years, whether you like it or not. Now, there is law back on Earth, and there are rules back on Earth, but there's not going to be any rules or law out there. So if you can handle that, and you can, let go of your ego and accept that things are just not in your control, and that there's nobody coming to save you, even from each other. You know, if another colonist starts going crazy, there's nothing you can do. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to run. And you might think, oh, well, you know, after 8 months, they'll surely figure this out, and, you know, you send a report back and they'll do something about it. They could send a weapons shipment or a squad of new colonists to exterminate certain people or enforce rules on the new colony. But because of the time delay and the fact that really the people who are going to know the most about Mars and about the actual reality on Mars are the colonists with the AIs. So they would be able to manufacture weapons and stuff to fight off anyone who's coming to resist them from, you know, extraterrestrially from back on Earth. So really, you're gonna have it's an environment that's super harsh. It's hard work, and you're gonna have to deal with being away from everything you knew or cared about, being trapped with the same people for 3 to 5 years. So for that reason, I think even though a lot of the people would apply to be a colonist, most people won't sign the contract. And most of the people who do sign the contract, when they're put through psychological testing and profiling, which they will, they just won't be accepted. Which is totally reasonable, you know. Most people just are not built to do that. It's not the new frontier in the same way as like when we went west to America. It's not even like that, because then you're still going with people you know, people from your own culture. There's a lot of you, you know, there's like hundreds of boats, 20, 30 boats going out, and you can get back within, say, 25, 30 days on a boat. You can get back to mainland Europe. This is so far away and so far removed from anything, and there's no guarantee of, for example, if you're a British colonialist and you went to the US, you said, I'm going to take this land. It's yours, and you can build on it, and you can live there, and you can do all kinds of stuff and set up the foundations for the future. And this I guess this would be true of Mars as well, and there'll probably be incentives for colonists like that. But, and you know, it'd be worth the money, because you could probably sell on the property to someone who's trying to status signal back on Earth, who didn't want to be a colonist but wanted to own the rights to something, who'll say, I'm one of the first to have bought this on Mars. Yeah, sure. But it's not very appealing property. If I said to you, I'm going to sell you this 200 meter squared piece of land. It's in the middle of the desert, but where it is 50,000 miles away from any person. It'll take you at least 6 months, because there's no transport networks or anything, to see another person. But you could bring a bunch of people there initially with you and stay there for a few years and live together. But you're not allowed to go outside, because if you go outside, you'll die instantly, because there's no oxygen. Yeah? That'll be $2 to $10 million for that property, because it'll be very lucrative initially, and probably for a while going on. But it's just not a good sell, is it? Now, for me personally, I would love to do this in 30 years' time. I think I may be ruled out of the criteria. So it depends on a couple of things, but I could be ruled out of the criteria because I would be deemed physically unfit for the job, because I'd be 54, 64 then. And at 54, you might say, well, you're probably not physically unfit. Okay, but they're going to want people who are very fit as possible, mentally and physically, yeah? So that's, the cutoff is about 40, I reckon. Maybe my age, 34, 35. Now, if we get to LEV, longevity escape velocity, and we can turn back the biological clock by that point, then maybe I'd get accepted on physical grounds. So I think if that happens, there's a chance I could be a colonist. There'd be a lot of competition, because there'd be just so many raw numbers applying, a lot of people who got contacts that I don't have and skills that I don't have. So the chances of me doing that would be pretty slim. But psychologically, I would probably fit the profile because I've traveled to other countries and lived in other countries for several years, leaving behind my family, my friends, my everything, without really having much contact with these people. And I've done this several times in my life so far. So it kind of shows that I have the psychological profile to do at least that part. I have worked super hard before in stints. FIFO. If you're Australian or you're an Irishman living in Australia, FIFO, when you fly in, fly out. So I did that kind of work, 3 weeks on, 1 week off. And I've had work where I've been in factories, done 100+ hours a week. So I'd probably do well on the psychological profiling side of it. And I've also lived rurally, very rurally. I'm talking the middle of the Amazon. I'm talking right now, I'm in the Himalayas. Yeah, but I wouldn't consider this properly rural because there are shops 2 kilometers down the road. This is fake rural, but it's rural for a city dweller. But being in the middle of the Amazon, 50 miles away from the nearest city, that's rural. That's very rural. Yeah. And I've been on projects in the middle of nowhere and villages in the middle of nowhere in Europe as well because I enjoy it. Like I said, I worked FIFO. That's pretty far. Moomba in Australia, South Australia. It's pretty far away from everything. Yeah. So, and I understand kind of the issues, that I'm going to have to deal with people who are going to be terrible to deal with. There's going to be people who are mentally breaking down, even if they fit the requirements, just because it's such a challenging job. So I think I would maybe fit into the profile of somebody who should be a colonist. So I'd have a good chance there. But because there'll be so many applicants, even with a 99.9% filter rate, which it will be, there's still probably going to be 1,000 to 2,000 applicants at the end of it, yeah? And they'll probably send off, 2,000 people over 3 or 4 years? Maybe over 5 years, they'll send over 2,000 people, 1,000 people. But initially, they're going to send off 30 people, 50 people. It's not going to be a lot of people. So even if I got accepted, I'd be waiting a few years, most likely. Because I'm probably not the most skilled, most qualified person, and I probably won't be in 30 years either. Yeah? I'm not going to improve that much that it would be justifiable. But I love the idea of going there, and I think it'd be very well paid. Not that, that's an incentive, but that's not really the point. I just think I like exploring. I like being in the middle of nowhere, no support, nothing, away from everybody, and dealing with the stress that causes, surviving, building stuff, and being there anyway. And that is like the ultimate challenge, the ultimate thing. And I have to be there for 3 to 5 years. So when I'm sat down, I can't sit and worry about the situation, think, oh, when's my time gone? I just have to get on with it as long as it takes. And I actually like that idea. I really love that idea. The idea of that kind of challenge really inspires me. And I think once they open it up to commercial investors, if I can afford property on Mars, I will definitely buy some. If they, this is what they should do really. They should give land to colonists. And I would hope to become a colonist and be given a plot of land. And I even know what I'd do with the land. So I'll talk about it in terms of priority. And these are probably the 3 most important things. The 3 most important bits of infrastructure that need to be built for a Mars colony. So number 1, the first thing I would build, I would not build residential homes. The first thing I would build, the number 1 priority, is a factory. Yeah, you need production. So I would be happy to be one of the people who owns one of the factories there. Not even for the money, just because I think if you're going to dedicate such a significant amount of time to being a colonist, you probably want to make sure that this succeeds. You want to see, humanity evolve. And as nice as it be to make residential areas for, rich people back on Earth who hope who'll buy it for stupid prices and escape and make my money. I just don't think that morally that's the right thing to do. I think the most pragmatic thing to do, the number one thing to do, would be to build a factory. I could be wrong about that. I'm not entirely sure what tech we're going to have, what kind of, AI humanoid manufacturing robots we're going to send with the first colonist. I don't know. We might even send the robots first. I don't know. I can't predict that part of it. But I can say that I think we will colonize it in time. So I don't know, but I think a factory is one of the most important things. Obviously, life support systems and stuff like that go without saying, but you're not building, the life support systems, the oxygen regulators, they're going to be built into everything, yeah? So it doesn't make sense to try to centralize it in a location because it's going to be running throughout everything ubiquitously, because it would have to in order for you to survive on Mars. But having factories, having local factories where you can manufacture whatever, it could be, I guess this would be a farm, I guess it would be agriculture, but it could be simply vegetables and animals. It could be proteins of different kinds for nutrition. It could be parts. It could be fuel. It could be all kinds of things. But I think a factory, if I were to be given land on Mars in 30 years, magically, they said, Yusuf, we don't care that you weren't a colonist. You seem like a good guy. Here's some land. The first thing the number one thing would be a factory. Now, if we were colonists and machines were doing a lot of this and it was all automated processes and it wasn't necessary, then maybe the second thing, now I'm tied between two things, but I think this should be the number two priority, is a storage area, actually. So gigantic shipping containers. Probably not shipping containers, probably a different material, but I'm not smart enough to know what material it would be made out of. But a storage facility, essentially, is what I see as being, I think, the second most important thing. Whether that be, a portion of that is for colonists to store their personal belongings, because they will have personal belongings, and some of the personal belongings aren't going to make sense to us. Like they're going to be some kind of weird tool that was fabricated by an AI that somebody called Sandy because there's something in that and attached sentimental value to it because that's what we do. We get attached to things and people. That's probably not what I'm really talking about. I think more storage of materials and storage of, utilitarian stuff. But storage of whatever, I think that would be the second most important infrastructure to establish on Mars. This is, I know people might say like, you should have a landing pad, you should have this. No, I'm talking about, we're talking about establishing a permanent colony. We're not talking about, we want to go home and we're talking about necessities, yeah? And then the third thing, and it's going to sound really weird because a lot of people aren't going to think that it's a necessity, but the third thing would actually be more or less an empty space that I would hold ownership of and allow people to do whatever with and turn that into a cultural center, because it's not as important as a factory and it's arguably not as important as a storage space, but it might be because of the kind of psychological depth and difficulty in living on Mars, not having things from Earth. Mars is going to develop its own totally separate culture that doesn't make sense to anyone on Earth and probably wouldn't make sense to them for many years, because it will take a long time to colonize Mars and for people to be casual tourists. For someone to get on Etihad Airways and fly to Mars, it's going to take 20 years probably. Maybe less, maybe longer, I don't know. But it's going to take a long time. I don't know the exact amount of time. So by the time they arrive, the culture will be totally different. But if there is no place for expression, no place for agreed upon memes and culture, because people don't have a shared culture, they don't have ideas and sentimental values and moral values, or a place where they can, write stupid things and do stupid things and reflect on the philosophical depth of being on Mars, or even write stupid words like the Shibbleby Z1 Sex Shack, right? That sounds ridiculous. That sounds stupid. But that's the kind of meme you might get on Mars, right? That's the kind of thing. And it's very important to early on establish not, a specific culture, not a specific set of rules and boundaries necessarily, although I think that is important, but to have like an independent culture that is self-directed and organic. I think it's very important for the psychological health of the colonists long term. And I also think it's a very selfless and significant thing to do on Mars. If I were to make this, I wouldn't put anything of my own in it. I wouldn't. Well, I'd write some things and contribute to it, but I wouldn't want to implant my ideas as the base of it. I think the whole point really is to allow the culture to develop organically. And so for me, I would love to own property on Mars. I'd love to be a Mars colonist. It would be terrible. It'd be very hard work. I'd hate it at times. I'd look into the vast abyss and think, why the fuck did you do this? You could have been sat on Earth where we've got infinite production capabilities and infinite lifespan and blah, 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 instead of taking a risk and trying to do something different. But I would never regret the decision of being a colonist. So, yeah. Don't know why I mentioned this. It's a really out there topic that no one will ever listen to, but I might listen to it in the future, and it was in my head and I just needed to get it out of my head. Enjoy life. Maybe I'll see you on Mars one day.